Hello, I'm Peter Simons and I'm based in the AICPA and CIMA office in the heart of London's financial district. We're talking today to expert guest Jackie Fitzgerald about how to get a competitive advantage by creating emotional wealth. Hello Jackie, where are you joining us from today?
Hi Peter, I'm in rural Oxfordshire.
Tell us about what you do and how you came to do it.
Okay, so I'm a recovering accountant actually. I am a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, and I had a long and quite successful career in international telecommunications finance, where I worked for Cable & Wireless PLC and other major telecoms carriers on really interesting projects such as subsea cables and satellites, so without which the internet would not run the way it does today. I also spent 10 years running successful joint ventures. And then I came out of the corporate world and I've been working as a coach for the past 9 years. In those 9 years, I've coached hundreds of clients who perhaps run their own businesses or work at a senior level in professional service firms or the corporate world.
And you're also trained in something called the Emotional Capital Report?
I am, yeah. So the Emotional Capital Report is a psychology of leadership. It explores the 10 essential competencies that are required for effective leadership. And what that means is, in a sort of a more day-to-day level, it's a brilliant way of understanding what leadership skills business leaders need to improve and how they can do that. So it gives us real insights into how we interact with our peers, those who work for us, our bosses and all of the stakeholders. And it also gives us some brilliant insights into how we just act in the world, which allows us to really develop those leadership skills which make the difference when we're at that higher level.
So let's talk about your business. Who do you usually work with and what do your clients bring you in to help with?
I work with accountants and other professionals and small businesses who are working in consultancy and research. So it's definitely people who use their brains for a living, who give advice, who provide support to other professionals and other businesses. They often bring me in to work with boards and leadership teams on all aspects of their leadership capabilities and competences. But they also bring me in when high potential employees are taking their first steps into senior management. So what we're trying to do is to get them off to a really good start as they develop their careers as leaders and people managers.
That makes sense. You've suggested that we call this episode Get Competitive Advantage by Creating Emotional Wealth. So why did you choose this title?
I chose that title because I think it's really important that we are likeable as people, that we get a good response from those with whom we come into contact in our daily work. And if you think about it, when you're buying a service yourself, you would always prefer to work with somebody who you like, who you get on with, who seems to understand you and what you need. In short, what we prefer to do is we prefer to buy from people, we prefer to work with people who have really good emotional intelligence. And so if you have that emotional wealth, if you have those emotional competencies, all of which can be developed, then you are far more likely to have great competitive advantage and be successful.
I like the idea that this is something that can be developed.
Yeah.
As management accountants, we're always being told that we need to improve our interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
So how should we begin?
Okay. Well, I think it's perhaps unfair to single out management accountants because most people, I think, would benefit from working on some aspect of our interpersonal skills. But I think what is really useful to do for most accountants is to, first of all, acknowledge that they may need help in this area. And that it's okay to seek that help. And I speak from my experience as an accountant, we want to be seen as experts. We want to be seen as people who know an awful lot about an awful lot of things. And so for many accountants, a common fear is not knowing something. But even experts need help sometimes. So high performers in sport, industry and politics all have advisors and coaches to help them. So I think the first thing anyone should do when they're thinking about their emotional intelligence is acknowledge that they do need some help. And that's relatively easy to get. There are lots of books you can read. There's so much that's available on the internet for free. You can attend webinars. So there are some practical things you can do yourself. But also a really good thing to do is to really listen to feedback that you get and use it.
That's one of the things people could do. I try to be practical. So do you know what I did? I looked up the Emotional Capital Report, and there's lots in there. So may I ask you to tell us about maybe 3 aspects which you consider to be particularly relevant to management accountants?
Yeah, well, the 3 aspects that I've chosen, the 3 competences that I've chosen to talk about today are self-knowledge, self-reliance, and straightforwardness. And the reason I've chosen self-knowledge is because that's a foundational competence. If you think about some of the people you may have worked with over the years, people who are not in touch with their own feelings, who don't understand what's motivating them and what their drivers are actually very, very difficult to work with. But because they don't understand themselves, they can seem really inconsistent. And they may lash out because they don't recognise when they're becoming angry. So self-knowledge is absolutely fundamental to successful leadership.
That's something that sounds like self-awareness and knowing how you're likely to react. So can you redirect yourself?
Yeah, it's very strongly linked to that. But it's also listening to that intuition. You know, we all have that feeling sometimes where something just doesn't feel quite right, and perhaps we can't really explain why, and we can't really sort of put our finger on what the actual problem is. People who are high in self-knowledge will actually be able to investigate that intuitive feeling and to understand the source of it and identify the emotions that are going with it. And then they can decide whether it's something they need to act on or whether it's something they just need to let go of.
And what about self-reliance?
Yeah.
How does that relate to motivation?
Motivation is an important part of everything we do. But self-reliance in the Emotional Capital Report context is more about having confidence in your own judgment as a leader and about knowing where you put your emotional and intellectual energy. So it's really about independence of thought and confidence in yourself and taking responsibility for those decisions that you make.
You talk about straightforwardness.
Yeah.
Isn't that sometimes about being too abrupt and annoying people?
It can be, yeah. So straightforwardness is a really fine balance. So many accountants are perceived as being a little bit too abrupt and a little bit too brusque in how they deal with people. But people who are high in straightforwardness are actually able to communicate really clearly, really well, but they also respond to other people's needs. So it's not a dictatorial approach. It's about acknowledging that other people may hold a different viewpoint to you and to be comfortable in being challenged, but also to be comfortable in challenging back. So it's more about clarity of communication and bringing people along with you than just telling people what to do.
So there are 3 very useful terms here: self-knowledge, self-reliance, and straightforwardness. Mm-hmm. Can you take us through each of these in turn? Tell us what it means in a practical sense. What are some examples you could share? Spell it out for us.
Sure. So self-knowledge I would talk about from my personal experience. And I once worked for somebody who was very well respected in their field, was an acknowledged expert in this particular area, and who genuinely thought that he was one of the guys, that people liked him and respected him and thought that he was approachable and easygoing. Now, people did quite like him, and they definitely respected him because he was an expert in what he did. But he wasn't very approachable. And if you ever went to him with a problem or something you wanted to talk about, he would just say things like, "I haven't got time for that right now. Don't bring that to me. Bring me solutions, not problems." And he would just shut down the door to any discussion. Now, obviously, as our boss, part of his job was to support us and help us, but he never did that. And so in a 360 appraisal, the feedback he got was that he was not approachable, that he really, people would you'd see them steeling themselves before they went in to see him. And that was a piece of feedback that he found to be really, really difficult, because in other areas of his life, he was very approachable, but at work he wasn't, because he was under so much pressure and didn't have time he felt, to deal with everything. So as a team, we helped him to become more approachable by giving him feedback when he was kind of shutting us down. And he also worked with a coach to help him develop that approachability. So that was an interesting one where how he saw himself and our experience of him were actually completely different.
Oh dear, I can see myself in quite a bit of that.
So with self-reliance, the leader's job is to generate the basic attitude of the group and to try and keep that as positive as they can. It's also to set the vision and give direction. Now, when you're low in self-reliance, it's really easy to allow other people to lead or take control. And it's also quite difficult to make decisions without involving everybody in that decision and making sure that you've got the buy-in from everybody and the protection or support that you need. And this is one where, when I first started out in leadership, I probably wasn't as self-reliant as I could be because I didn't believe that I was ready to be in a position of having been given a team. And so instead of leading, what I started to do was to defer to people who were older than me or more experienced than I was, because I felt comfortable doing that, because I felt that I trusted them more than I trusted myself.
Yeah, and being straightforward, is that something that people have too much of? Or is it something that some of them may need to develop more of?
It can go either way. Some people are too straightforward. They are too brutal in how they communicate with other people. So they don't always think about how that piece of feedback or that comment will be taken by those who work for them. You also have people who are actually so nervous about asking somebody to do something that they use lots of qualifiers like, would you mind? Or I know you're very busy and I'd really like it if you did this for me. And that confuses people because they don't understand that it's an instruction. So what you're looking for is kind of a midway point where you are direct and you have communicated clearly and well, but that you have also addressed everyone's concerns and you have created buy-in from them. So it's a real balancing act between telling and using empathy to bring people on board.
So this sounds like a development of that author Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence. What's the additional contribution here? How does this take that work forward?
What this does is the Emotional Capital Report draws on the work of many, many academics and people who have researched emotional intelligence. So it's not just Goleman, although he is definitely influential in the development of the Emotional Capital Report. And the main difference with that is it kind of synthesizes all of the work these wonderful academics and researchers have done, but it has a very specific focus on the 10 competences that are essential for great leadership.
Interesting. We'll continue our conversation shortly as we discuss emotional intelligence and how it can transform people and business. All of that is coming up in this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. For more information about our topic, take a look at our episode show notes in the podcast app you're using. You can find out more about this podcast and about the rest of our wider project at gobeyonddisruption.com. Today we're talking to Jackie Fitzgerald about how to get competitive advantage by creating emotional intelligence. So Jackie, you mentioned that one of the most important qualities is adaptability. Businesses need to be agile for the digital age, so this sounds like a great place to start. What's it about in terms of emotional capital?
Well, adaptability is one of the fundamental competencies for somebody who is looking to grow their emotional capital. And if you think about it, we live in a world that is volatile, that's uncertain, where there are lots of changes, and we have to be very responsive to those changes. Emotionally intelligent leaders are able to adapt their thinking, how they feel about things and their actions in response to those changing circumstances. So, but it goes beyond that. It actually means that they're tolerant of others and receptive to new ideas. So they'll listen to different points of view and they can also be very flexible. And that means that, first of all, they're a lot nicer to work with than somebody who is very set in the ways, who has a very set routine. but also it means that they are flexible and responsive to the changing needs of the people around them and also of the organisations in which they work.
So let's make this really practical for our listeners.
Yeah.
What does good and bad adaptability look like?
When I first started as a coach, I was asked to go along and meet an organisation. It was a family business, and they had been trading for around about 60 years in a sector that was going through some disruption. And as soon as I walked in, I found the atmosphere to be quite oppressive and quite stifling. And I asked the person who'd invited me in about this, and they explained that one of the problems they had is that half of the family felt that they had always done things the way they had done and that there was no need to change. And the other half of the family felt that we couldn't go on like this and we needed to make some radical changes and to disrupt the way that they did things. And the family was almost in conflict over the way forward with this. And what happened was that we had several meetings, but they were never able to agree on having any coaching or consultancy to help them become more adaptable. And very soon afterwards, the business folded because they just weren't responsive to the changing needs of the marketplace and of their customer base. So when people and businesses are very set in their ways, they become quite old-fashioned. And one of my alarm bells is when a business will say something like, "We've always done it this way," because that means that they're actually resisting change quite strongly and that they are not changing in a way that meets the needs of their customers and clients.
I'm sure we're all inclined to resist change, and we must learn not to. Now, Jackie, that's a great example of where someone didn't have adaptability. The whole family didn't have adaptability, and they paid the price. Can you give us an example of where somebody has developed emotional wealth that's been to the advantage of their business?
I was working with a client who ran a professional services firm, and he was pretty high in emotional wealth himself. But as he was bringing his people up and training them in client management skills, what we were finding was that things were falling by the wayside. Business wasn't developing as well as it should. And the clients weren't feeling too happy with how things were going always. And we did a 360 appraisal, and what we discovered was that some of the more client-facing people were not that highly skilled in emotional intelligence. So we put them through a program to help them develop whichever of the skills they needed. And the next time we ran the surveys, we find that the clients were around 40% happier with their interactions with the firm. And what that meant was that they were happier to refer the firm to their friends and their contacts, with the result that business grew. So it was a really good example of how actually developing certain areas of emotional intelligence enabled his people to be much better in terms of how they managed and interacted with their clients, which led to quite a rapid growth in the business over 2 years.
Very good. It strikes me that this whole adaptability issue is really important. How can people improve their adaptability?
There are some really simple things that you can do to improve adaptability, and they're basically linked to getting out of your comfort zone. So we're all happy in our comfort zone. We don't like to move because it's easy. But just disrupting that a little bit can actually have quite a powerful effect on our adaptability. So something as simple as taking a different route to work, trying a new sandwich shop for lunch, starting a new hobby can all have quite a big impact on our adaptability. Along with that, if you develop a growth mindset, and what that means is you treat mistakes as learning opportunities, as ways to grow and develop, rather than disasters that must be avoided at all costs, then you will inherently start to become more adaptable. Remember, adaptability is a skill that you can develop, and if you work on it every day, you will definitely become more adaptable.
Let's get your personal angle on this. How did coaching help you with your own emotional intelligence?
It has helped me through challenging what I think about myself. So certainly in the days when I had a senior leadership role myself, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you're right and that everybody has to come along with you. And what I found was that my coaches were always able to challenge that view and to give me different perspectives and different ways of looking at things. it's so easy to develop that tunnel vision where you think that this, my way is, it's so obvious and it's the only way that's right. So I found that degree of challenge has always been extremely helpful, together with some practical help on developing some of the skills that I needed. So I mentioned at the start that self-reliance for me in the early days of my leadership career was quite difficult because I had a tendency to defer to other people. And working with a coach helped me to build that self-reliance and to be able to have confidence in my own judgment and in what I wanted to do in my department.
We all want to stay ahead of the curve, so maybe you could help us out here. What disruption do you see coming next that we need to get ready for?
From coaching, we're in the middle of digital disruption right now. When I first started 9 years ago, people wouldn't even use a telephone for coaching. They wanted to meet face to face. It was nothing. Whereas now, people are very comfortable using Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or something of that nature. And we are also able to use a lot of online tools like the Emotional Capital Report and video to help educate our clients before they actually come into a coaching session. So I think that's one of the things we're actually in the middle of. The next disruption I see coming is actually, I think it's around the use of therapy techniques in coaching. So the dividing line between coaching and therapy has always been a little bit blurred, and, coach practitioners, and when you're training as a coach, you are taught some boundaries beyond which you go. But certainly what I found over the last few years is that there is more of a need for coaching to become more therapeutic in its approach. And I think that's something that we'll see a lot of in the coming years.
So it seems to me that when technology comes along, just as it's doing in this era of digital disruption, that the machines will take care of a lot of our work.
Yes.
And that means leaving us to put more emphasis on the interpersonal aspects of our work. So, before we wrap up, let's ask you for some signposting. For anyone who'd like to find out more about this topic in general, or about your work in particular, what resources would you recommend?
The starting point is there's a really wonderful book written by Martin Newman, who is one of the creators of the Emotional Capital Report. And the book is called Emotional Capitalists, and it's available in all good bookshops. So that would be a really good place to start if you're interested in exploring this further. There is also a website. You can have a look at my website where there is some information on this. But if you go to rochemartin.com, and I'll make sure this is available in the notes that people can have, then there are some videos and articles on there that people may find useful.
And where would people find you online?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I write a lot of articles and posts on LinkedIn. My website is alchimia.co.uk, and I often run webinars which are free, where we talk about the 3 keys to successful leadership.
Very good. Now, finally, what's one piece of advice you'd like to leave us with that would help us to go beyond disruption?
The piece of advice would be work on your adaptability. And the thing to do here is to treat disruption as an opportunity, not a threat. It's very easy to resist disruption and feel that it's going to harm our life in some way. But actually, it can often be a force for good, and it can often lead to very positive changes. So I would say stay optimistic, stay open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. And the key to that is staying curious. It's easy to just say no to new things, but a curious person will always want to find out more before they make a decision. So please stay curious.
Stay curious. That's definitely a theme we hear more and more about these days. As humans, we have a unique intelligence, so we need to keep using it. Thank you, Jackie. That's a good place to end our conversation today. There's plenty more to explore about this topic, so our show notes will have links to all the resources you've mentioned. To view them, just click on the episode's info icon in the podcast app on your smartphone or tablet, or open the episode in your computer's web browser. You'll find everything right there. There are 2 further websites we'd recommend to listeners interested in taking this further. AICPAstore.com/GoBeyondDisruption and CIMAstore.com/GoBeyondDisruption. Thanks again to our guest, Jackie Fitzgerald, and of course, thank you for listening. From our London office, I'm Peter Simons. Till next time, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.